Hey everybody, this is Keith Gleason, host of Indie Comics Relay, creator of the Mighty Mascots, and promoter for the Plastic City Comic Con. I wanted to do an introduction for a new series of videos that were produced by our friend and frequent guest on the show, Nandor Fox Shaffer, who also has a great Kickstarter live right now for seasons volume 1 and 2. But he could produce this great 6-episode series about creating comic books. And I know I often get asked all the time at conventions on how to create comic books. And I see a lot of videos, websites where they talk about it, but Nandor broke it down from an indie point of view. And I really think it's a great 6-episode video series that gets to the heart of making indie comics. I will probably drop one every Wednesday until they're done. There's 6 episodes altogether. And then I'll have it as a playlist on the Indie Comics Relay channel. So if you have anybody that, wants to learn how to make comics or have a guide to make comics, this is a perfect playlist you can send them. So without further ado, let's bring you the series, and also check out Foxhole Comics. That's the YouTube channel of Nandor Fox Shaffer. And if you don't want to wait for me to drop these weekly, you can head over to his channel at any time and watch the whole series as is. But enjoy back seasons and you'll love this list. All right. Bye.
It's the summer of 2014. I'm 17 years old and I've just graduated high school. My entire future is ahead of me. My career path of choice is to become a writer, one of the creative variety. I have no clue how I will accomplish this. I will eventually decide to pursue a creative writing degree at a small college in my Midwestern hometown the following year for only a handful of semesters before dropping out. During this time, the insane thought of becoming a professional comic book writer specifically takes hold, and it's between the spring of 2014 and the beginning of 2016 where I come up with the idea for and start scripting what will end up being my first comic book and graphic novel series, Seasons. Welcome to part 1 of creating my first comic. In this video series, I plan to break down every stage of the comic book making process. In my last video, I walked you through why comics ended up as my field of choice to try and tell stories in. However, not everyone who thinks they can do something can follow through with the actual doing it part. They may also not do it well. Ideas for stories can be overly derivative, clunkily conceived, or plainly shallow. This is true especially when stories are approached by aspiring writers who have never written or finished penning a story before in their entire life. That was me 10 years ago. I had no idea how to develop a plot with a 3-act structure, how to write comics, what kind of comic or story I'd like to write, or even if the story idea I came up with would be right for the comics medium itself. I'd never written anything I was going to share with the world. Fast forward to today, and I've since written almost 1,000 pages of comics, with 400 of those pages currently published. The last 10 years have taught me 10 years worth of trial and error because I've never taken a break from creating comics after diving in head first. With that said, I think it's about time to share what I've learned along the way. Maybe you've been making comics for years, or maybe you've always wanted to make comics but never knew where to start. Either way, it's my desire for this series to take you behind the curtain and give you the behind-the-scenes details of where the journey for Seasons, as well as my own journey with making comics, began. All a writer needs are the dream, their handy-dandy notebook or keyboard, and most importantly, the idea. It all starts somewhere, and that somewhere is the idea. The idea is the source from which all plot points, plot twists, characters, and character arcs spring from. There's no story without the idea. The idea could be a theme, a plot, a character, a world, a concept, a thought experiment, a question, an emotion, and the list goes on. Ideas have no limits. They can come from anywhere and when you least expect it. Writers don't know where ideas come from, so please don't ask us, but that's because ideas cannot be found. They can only be received. There is a story behind every story, yet there's no stockpile of ideas to be scavenged, except perhaps from all the art that's already been created. It's true that inspiration for ideas and stories is everywhere, and a writer will know inspiration when it hits them. But a writer's personal life experience, knowledge, further research on a topic, or straight up inventiveness is the launching pad for how ideas are captured and explored. It's why it's necessary to write some ideas down, because the next day they may be gone and another writer may think of it, which is just the absolute worst. Passion, imagination, and what I'd call technical story and literary logic are four of the most essential ingredients to harness when it comes to being a standout storyteller. Passion drives the motivation to put in the work, imagination provides the raw material, and understanding how stories are structured and written, be it narration, dialogue, pacing, length, continuity, world building, etc., equips the writer with the direction and guardrails to mold that raw material into a coherent, approachable work of art. A writer can be the most enthusiastic hype man for their creation, but the creation has to make sense. It has to read well. It can't break its own established rules. No matter how artsy or abstract a creator's or creation's intent is to be, the writer's job is to communicate their ideas clearly to their audience, even if the goal is abstraction. To do this effectively, the writer must present their story with the utmost care for its narrative and the players within said narrative. A writer must set the stage for their audience and grasp fully the type of story they're wanting to tell inside and out. No one knows their own story better than the writer themselves, and that's the point. It's the writer's job to relay their story to the audience with clarity. A writer cannot expect to do that adequately if they don't even know what kind of playground they're running around in. The reason I'm laying all this out beforehand is because the quality of an idea is only as applauded as its execution. A great idea doesn't automatically warrant praise if it fails in its delivery. A writer can be a fabulous songwriter and lyricist, but can they sing in key? The cornerstone foundational germ of the idea that became Seasons struck me as I was contemplating the right comic book story for me to tackle. I wanted to write a comic book story in the long tradition of the medium. This wasn't going to be a Netflix pitch or a shortcut to Hollywood. I wanted to write a story that could only be told in comic book form. Like most comic book writers, I was an avid devourer of Marvel and DC comics, and I wanted to write superhero stories. That's what birthed my adoration for comics from the very beginning. The dream has always been to write for the big two, or big three if you include Image Comics, and that dream is still alive to this day. I wasn't naive enough to believe I'd be able to work for these companies without anything to show for it, of course, so I asked myself, what were the elements that I liked so much about superhero stories and superhero characters that I could put into my yet-to-be-named creator-owned superhero comic? One answer outshined all others: the superpowers. That's what makes these characters superheroes in the first place, after all. Superman can fly, has super strength, heat vision, his freeze breath. Wolverine has his healing factor, enhanced senses, and indestructible claws. Batman has his money and gadgets despite not being superhuman. Spider-Man, his web shooters, strength, spider sense, and ability to climb and stick to walls. These abilities defined a character's utility and, frankly, their cool factor from a kid's point of view. With that in mind, the first idea domino to fall that started the chain reaction which led to all the other ideas to follow was creating a character whose powers were never static. They had to change to keep the story fresh and the character on their toes. Yet they couldn't change by random happenstance. There had to be a trigger mechanism. Remember the story logic ingredient I mentioned earlier? Thus, the idea of the changing of the seasons acting as that trigger mechanism manifested. More experienced writers than I would call this a story engine. And because this character's abilities would change in repeated cycles, I determined that a classic superhero tale, including tights and an alias, would be tonally at odds, so I settled on a young man, because I knew what it was like to be one, who lived in the real world, albeit in a fictional city, with real problems. I attempted to lay the groundwork for a traditional ongoing superhero adventure, but it wasn't clicking. It wasn't exciting to me. I instead wanted to tell a grounded superhero story, yet I didn't arrive at that conclusion due to my predeterminations, but I arrived at that conclusion because the story necessitated it. And the more I developed the story for Seasons, the more I realized that it wasn't really a superhero book at all, but that it fit more within the supernatural genre. It grew its own legs and revealed to me how it demanded to be told correctly. More on all this and further developing the story of Seasons in part 2 of this series. It's vitally important to listen closely to your story and to listen closely to your characters. They'll save you the trouble of dead ends and wrong turns in the largest and smallest of ways. It may appear as though all the stars aligned for Seasons from the get-go without a hitch, and I will say there were instances where parts of the whole were joining effortlessly, but it's only in hindsight that I can see all the pieces of the puzzle create a full picture. I'll be straightforward. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how the comic book industry functioned, and I had never read a book on writing and was completely oblivious to crafting stories with a beginning, middle, and end, much less crafting a competent one. Now, all of a sudden, the idea for an entire series was in my lap, and I had a long road ahead of me if I was going to commit to it. As preposterous as it sounds, there was a version of Seasons where I wanted to release an issue to the direct market according to the calendar year. That was in the back of my head the whole time I was scripting the series. For example, if a publisher picked it up, the first 4 issues of the spring storyline would hit stores starting in March 2017 and ending in May 2017. The summer storyline would release from July 2017 to September 2017, and so on. It was going to be this very meta, in real-time schedule where whichever season of the year the main character was in the story, the reader would be in it too. Little did I realize at the time that not every state in the US has literal seasons like mine does. Massive oversight, huh? It's such a silly idea, I'm kind of embarrassed to even bring it up. Crowdfunding the series as individual graphic novels for each season made more sense in the end. I was in my late teens when I started writing Seasons, so while I didn't have much life experience to draw from, I watched a ton of movies and TV shows, read hundreds of comic books and dozens of novels, and listened to countless hours of music growing up. Every song basically tells a story, by the way, so pay attention. Comics were in my DNA, stories were in my DNA. I lived and breathed them on a daily basis, and I loved them and their power. I loved stories to death. I felt emotions and experiences deeply as well. I also keenly observed people almost involuntarily and would take mental notes of how people looked, spoke, and expressed themselves in body language. I was a sponge to the world around me, essentially, absorbing everything as kids do. This is a more valuable tool than any book on writing could offer, and proves the point that the only thing between a writer and their story is the writer themselves. Writing is the best teacher on how to become a better writer. How-to books, writing seminars and workshops, and anecdotal advice from industry professionals without a doubt eases the anxieties of the intimidating blank page, but in my experience, the learning is in the doing. It's only years later that I can articulate my own process because I didn't know what my process even was. I'm still figuring it out to this day. Ideas are not stories. A premise is not a story. They are what breed stories. I feel like an oddball amongst writers because I'm not one of those ideas guys. I don't have 100 story ideas written in a notebook somewhere that I'll never get to write. This is mainly a result of my need to hyperfixate and ruminate on an idea for a while to see if it's a nut worth trying to crack. Stories take a lot out of me, so if I'm going to work on one, I have to come at it from all angles, and it has to be one story idea at a time. Stories deserve their writer's full attention. I see the utility in jumping around from story idea to stretch those creative muscles, but I can also see the potential for that to become a procrastination habit, taking a writer away from interrogating a story idea long enough to weigh if it's actually workable and not dead on arrival. In whichever camp you may fall, chase ideas that excite you. A writer's excitement or lack thereof will come through in their writing, I guarantee it. You can't necessarily teach someone how to be a creative person, but I believe you can teach someone to master and expand their own range of creativity, including yourself. This is where I was at this point in my life, a dam waiting to break. Although I still needed channels to distribute the water so I wasn't just vomiting out waves of illiterate babble. Most activities I've learned in my life were self-taught, and this includes the art of writing. So while I'm no expert, I do have years of experience making comics. And while I may have had the idea ready to go in 2014, how to bring it to life was a continual learning process that took years to realize as a physical product in late 2017, which is where I normally consider my comics career, if we want to call it that, to have begun. It was so long ago that I barely remember how I did it without the experience I have now. This is where passion and imagination play such pivotal roles in the inertia of wanting to be an independent and professional comic book writer. Nothing else is motivating you except the dream, but at least now you have something married to the dream that should propel you forward in light of its near tangibility, the idea. So, you want to make comics and you have your idea. What's next? Oh yeah, that little thing called the story. Stay tuned for creating my first comic, Part 2. P.S. Are you a writer? How did you come up with your story? What ideas led to its final iteration? What ideas are you working through now or are you interested in working on? Let me know in the comments below. And please sign up to be notified when Seasons Volumes 1 and 2 trade paperback editions launch on Kickstarter later this year. We're only 13 signups away from reaching 100, so clicking on the Notify Me button would go a long way. Thank you.